My husband said he needed to relax. Then he went on a trip with his friends for 2 weeks and left me alone with our newborn baby. When he came back, what he saw left him speechless. No, no, this can't be happening. My name is Sienna. I'm 33 years old, and my husband thought abandoning me with a screaming newborn was simply a well-deserved vacation. When he came crawling back 2 weeks later, begging me to open the front door, he had no idea the locks had been changed. The house had been sold, and his entire life had been completely dismantled. Before I continue with this story, let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to deal with a toxic partner who completely underestimated your worth. My 3-week-old son, Leo, was crying loudly in our bedroom. I stood in the doorway clutching my abdomen. A sharp pain radiated from my recent C-section incision. I could feel warm blood seeping through my bandages. I was trembling from physical exhaustion and completely terrified. Just a few feet away, my husband Derek calmly folded designer swim shorts. The zipper of his expensive suitcase sounded louder than Leo's cries. Derek didn't even look at his son. He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusted his sunglasses, and grabbed his luggage. I stepped forward, pleading with him. Derek, please, you can't leave right now. My incision is bleeding again. Leo has a high fever right now. I can't do this alone. He sighed loudly as if I were an annoying child. He turned toward me with absolute contempt. I just need to relax, Sienna, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I've been working extremely hard as a regional sales director, paying for all of this. You stay home all day doing nothing except sitting on the couch. All I hear is a baby screaming and you complaining. I'm going to Cabo with the guys for 2 weeks to get my sanity back. Don't call me unless someone's dead. He turned his back on me, walked down the wooden hallway, and slammed the heavy oak front door behind him. I dragged myself to the window, wincing in pain, just in time to watch his Audi speed away. There I was, a successful forensic accountant who dismantled financial fraud for massive corporations, reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor of my bedroom. Having grown up in the foster care system, I never had a mother to call. I fought my way up from nothing, earning scholarships, building a massive blind trust fund before meeting Derek, and creating complete independence for myself. I thought his charm meant he would be a loving father. Instead, he left me bleeding and terrified while he went off drinking. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching Leo tightly against my chest. His tiny face was red, his fists clenched. I rocked him gently, humming a lullaby through my silent sobs. Every time I shifted my weight, a burning pain shot through my lower abdomen. The doctor had ordered strict bed rest to prevent my stitches from reopening. Derek knew that. He had sat beside me in the hospital, holding my hand and pretending to be a concerned husband. It was all an act. The moment we got home, and the reality of a crying baby set in, the mask completely fell off. We lived in a flawless $20 million house. Derek loved showing it off to his friends, hosting dinner parties to display the imported Italian marble. What he didn't know, what his arrogant mind never bothered to check, was that the house didn't belong to him. I had bought it entirely through a blind trust years before we met. His name was only on the utility bills. But standing in the nursery, staring at the empty doorway, my financial power brought me no comfort. Money couldn't stop my bleeding. Money couldn't make my husband love his son. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to call for emergency medical help because of the bleeding, but after taking a deep breath, I realized it was only a superficial tear caused by the stress of the argument. I managed to clean the wound and apply fresh medical gauze while holding my squirming newborn. After an agonizing hour of pacing the room, Leo finally fell asleep against my shoulder. I gently laid him in his wooden crib and stood there staring at his peaceful sleeping face. A deep, terrifying clarity washed over me. The tears stopped falling abruptly. The suffocating panic in my chest was suddenly replaced by a cold, calculated stillness. Derek thought I was just a weak, dependent woman who would cry and patiently wait for his return. He completely forgot who he had married. I make a living investigating and destroying arrogant liars, and he had just handed me the match to burn his entire life to the ground. Exactly 3 hours had passed since Derek walked out the front door. I had finally managed to calm Leo, and I was sitting quietly in the nursery rocking chair, breathing shallowly to control the sharp pain radiating from my torn surgical stitches. Suddenly, the distinct metallic click of the front door unlocking echoed through the silent house. I froze in place. My heart pounded against my ribs. Derek had barely been gone long enough to reach his boarding gate. Before I could process the rush of adrenaline, the sharp sound of designer heels echoed quickly across the hardwood floors. It wasn't my husband returning with a guilty conscience. It was my mother-in-law, Brenda, and my sister-in-law, Megan. They used the emergency spare key I foolishly gave them months ago. They didn't bother announcing themselves. They didn't tiptoe down the hallway to see if the newborn baby was sleeping. Instead, they walked straight past the open nursery door without even glancing inside. I carefully placed Leo back into his wooden crib. I gritted my teeth against the burning physical pain in my lower abdomen and slowly made my way down the hallway to confront whatever new nightmare was unfolding in my home. I found them standing in the middle of my kitchen. Brenda was aggressively wrapping the thick black power cord of my custom espresso machine around her wrist. Megan was removing the glass water tank from the back of the machine. "What exactly are you doing in my house?" I asked, leaning heavily against the doorframe because my legs were shaking. Brenda didn't even look up. "Derek called us from the airport lounge," she said casually. "He said he desperately needed some space from your constant crying. Since you'll be sitting around breastfeeding all day, you certainly don't need high-end caffeine. Megan has an important brunch tomorrow, and this machine will look absolutely perfect on her countertop." I stared at them in complete disbelief at the sheer audacity of their trespassing. "You're breaking into my house to steal my coffee machine just because your son abandoned his bleeding wife and sick baby to go drinking in Mexico?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm despite the rage boiling inside me. Megan rolled her eyes and scoffed loudly. "Oh, please, stop being so unbelievably dramatic, Sienna," she sneered. "Derek is the sole financial provider of this entire family. He's under immense pressure keeping a luxury roof over your head. The least you can do is let the man breathe and enjoy a vacation with his friends." Brenda finally turned to face me. Her cold eyes slowly scanned my body, lingering judgmentally on my loose gray sweatpants and the swollen curve of my postpartum stomach. "Look at yourself, Sienna," she said with pure disgust. "You've completely let yourself go. No wonder my son needed to escape this miserable environment. Men like Derek have extremely high standards. You grew up stumbling through foster care with absolutely nothing to your name, so I know you simply don't understand the immense pressure a truly successful man like him is constantly under. You should be grateful he even bothered marrying someone without a real family to begin with." The cruelty in her voice wasn't new, but openly weaponizing my childhood trauma was a new level of low. My hands instantly curled into tight fists, my nails digging painfully into my palms. I desperately wanted to scream at them. I wanted to physically throw them out by their expensive hair extensions. But my forensic accountant brain quickly took over my emotional response. Emotion is the absolute enemy of flawless strategy. I took a deep breath and deliberately forced my hands to relax at my sides. "Take the machine," I said in a chillingly calm voice. "Take it right now and get out of my house. Leave the spare key on the marble island before you walk out that door." Brenda smiled triumphantly, clearly believing she had just won yet another glorious psychological victory over her weak daughter-in-law. She dropped the silver key onto the countertop with a sharp metallic clink. "See, Megan," Brenda said cheerfully as she lifted the heavy espresso machine into her arms. "She can be reasonable when she finally remembers her proper place in this family." The two of them walked out confidently, letting the heavy front door slam shut behind them. I stood completely alone in the silent kitchen. They thought they were stripping me of my dignity. They had no idea they were sealing their own catastrophic fate. The silence in the house was deafening after the heavy front door slammed shut. I stood frozen in the kitchen for a few moments, listening to the hum of the refrigerator where my expensive espresso machine used to sit. The physical adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a sharp, throbbing pain in my lower abdomen. I needed to sit down immediately. I needed to breathe. I slowly made my way down the hallway, past the nursery where Leo was still sleeping, and opened the door to our shared office. The room was divided into two distinct halves. My side was an immaculate L-shaped desk with dual monitors, meticulously organized filing cabinets, and a shredder. Derek occupied the other half. His heavy mahogany desk was always a chaotic disaster zone of scattered papers, half-empty coffee cups, and unopened mail. He always claimed that his creative genius in sales required a messy environment. I slowly lowered myself into his leather executive chair, hoping the soft cushioning would ease the pressure on my surgical wound. I rested my elbows on his desk and buried my face in my hands. A fresh wave of exhausted tears threatened to spill over my lashes. I felt unbelievably stupid. I had ignored every obvious red flag. I had allowed his toxic family to disrespect me in my own home. I was sitting there drowning in self-pity when my elbow accidentally slipped against the edge of a massive stack of manila folders. The entire pile collapsed, cascading off the mahogany desk and crashing onto the hardwood floor. I flinched at the sudden noise, holding my breath and praying it wouldn't wake Leo. When silence returned, I carefully bent down to assess the mess. Hidden beneath the avalanche of corporate sales reports was Derek's old silver iPad. He had bought a newer Pro model 6 months ago and claimed he threw this one away because the battery was defective. Apparently, he had simply buried it beneath his paperwork and left it permanently plugged into a wall outlet hidden behind the desk. When the heavy folders hit the screen, the device woke from sleep mode. A bright white glow illuminated the dark corner of the floor. I crouched down, gritting my teeth against the abdominal pain, and picked up the tablet. The screen was locked, but a banner notification glowed brightly in the center. It was a synced text message from an Apple iMessage account. The sender's name was saved simply as Madison. Madison was his 22-year-old junior sales assistant. She had graduated from college just last year, and Derek constantly complained about how incompetent she was. I stared at the glowing notification banner. The words burned themselves into my retinas. "The sweet in Cabo is ready, Daddy. I can't wait." The air was violently sucked from my lungs. My chest tightened so severely I thought I was having a sudden heart attack. He wasn't on a desperate mental health retreat with his college friends. He wasn't overwhelmed by the noble pressure of being the sole financial provider. He was on a romantic tropical getaway with a woman an entire decade younger than me, and he was using my postpartum struggles as justification for abandoning his newborn son. A strange physiological reaction happened inside my body in that exact moment. The warm tears pooling in my eyes instantly stopped. The suffocating weight of abandonment disappeared. The terrified, bleeding postpartum wife effectively died right there in that leather executive chair. In her place, the corporate forensic accountant awakened. In my line of work, you don't cry when you discover a massive discrepancy. You don't scream when you uncover hidden offshore accounts. You simply lower your head, follow the paper trail, and build an airtight case that leaves the guilty party absolutely no room to escape. Derek was no longer my husband. He was now an active investigation. He was a fraud case sitting directly in front of me. He had made a critical amateur mistake because he believed this old iPad was hidden and forgotten. He had never bothered signing out of his primary Apple ID account. Every text message, every photograph, every email, and every downloaded bank statement was currently syncing to this device through the cloud. I gently placed the iPad in the center of the desk. I didn't know the passcode to unlock the main screen, but I didn't need it. I stood up, walked to my immaculate workstation, and powered on both of my monitors. Finally, it was time to aggressively follow the money trail. The two screens flickered to life, bathing the dark, silent office in a sharp, intimidating blue light. I sat down at my workstation, cracking my knuckles out of habit. Derek was incredibly predictable. For a man who prided himself on being a master strategist in corporate sales, his digital security was absolutely laughable. I connected his silver iPad directly to my secure corporate network server and mirrored the high-resolution screen onto my left monitor. He used the same password for nearly everything he owned. It was a painfully simple combination of his birth year, the letters of his old college fraternity, and a single exclamation mark at the end. I bypassed the basic lock screen within seconds and immediately opened his synced email application. As a forensic accountant, my eyes are professionally trained to spot tiny anomalies within massive datasets. I quickly searched for keywords related to flight confirmations, hotel reservations, and bank transfers. The Cabo trip receipts appeared instantly. First-class international airline tickets for 2 people. A luxury beachfront suite for 14 days. Prepaid reservations at 5-star restaurants. The total cost was staggering, but what truly caught my attention was the payment method. He hadn't used his personal credit card or our joint checking account. The digital payment confirmation emails displayed a specific bank routing number that I didn't immediately recognize from our usual monthly expenses. I opened a secure browser window on my right monitor and logged into our primary banking portal. I skipped past our standard checking and savings account balances, navigating directly to the hidden sub-accounts. My heart suddenly sank into my stomach. It was the routing number for Leo's college savings fund. Before we got married, I had established a high-yield investment account specifically intended for my future children. Because I grew up bouncing through the unstable foster care system without any financial safety net, ensuring that my child had a fully funded education was my highest priority in life. For the past 5 years, I had diligently deposited every one of my annual corporate bonuses into that specific account. Derek had barely contributed a single cent, constantly claiming that his monthly sales commission checks were desperately needed to maintain our luxury lifestyle. When Leo was finally born just 3 weeks ago, I legally transferred the accumulated money into a formal custodial college fund. But because Derek was the father, his name was automatically listed by the bank as an authorized secondary signer. The current available balance staring back at me on the screen was a nauseating 0. My hands flew across the mechanical keyboard as I quickly pulled up the transaction history. Just 3 days earlier, while I was heavily medicated in the hospital recovering from an emergency C-section, Derek had authorized a massive wire transfer. He had completely emptied exactly $80,000 from his own newborn son's future. He had funneled the cash through a temporary holding account to make it appear like a routine investment transfer to anyone casually reviewing the statements. But digital money always leaves a permanent footprint. I traced the routing numbers and cross-referenced them with the receipts in his email inbox. Only $10,000 had gone toward the luxury Cabo vacation with his young assistant, Madison. That meant $70,000 was still completely unaccounted for. An icy wave of pure disgust swept through my body. He wasn't just cheating on me with a younger woman. He was actively stealing from our infant son to finance his secret double life. The money I worked 90-hour weeks to save. The massive bonuses I earned while pregnant, nauseated, and exhausted, gone with a single click. While I was literally bleeding on an operating table in the hospital, he genuinely believed my postpartum pain and sleep deprivation would keep me distracted enough for him to permanently hide his tracks. He thought I would blindly accept whatever flimsy financial excuse he offered when he finally returned from his fake mental health retreat. I downloaded every PDF bank statement, every wire transfer confirmation, and every email receipt. I meticulously organized them into a highly encrypted digital folder on my private server. I was no longer acting like a betrayed wife. I was actively building a federal prosecution file against a hostile target. But I still needed to know exactly where the missing $70,000 had gone. If it hadn't been spent on the vacation, it had to be tied to a major physical asset. I turned my attention back to his synced text messages with Madison, ready to dig even deeper into his pathetic lies. The financial autopsy had only just begun. I focused on the temporary holding account where Derek had parked the remaining $70,000 stolen from our son's college fund. Derek was only a regional salesman, not some brilliant financial mastermind. His desperate attempts to hide his fingerprints were incredibly sloppy, careless, and amateur. I noticed a secondary wire transfer originating from that holding account directed to a newly formed limited liability company. I quickly logged into the state business registry database. It took me 3 minutes to obtain the official incorporation documents. He had named the shell company Cabo Investments LLC, registering it only 2 weeks before Leo was born. The sheer arrogance of the name made my blood boil, but I maintained complete professional focus. I traced the money flowing into Cabo Investments LLC. The digital trail took a sharp turn. The entire $70,000 had been transferred in a single massive transaction just 48 hours earlier. I tracked the receiving routing number. It didn't belong to a cryptocurrency exchange or a high-yield offshore investment account. It belonged to an exclusive luxury automotive group located in the wealthiest district of our city. Derek had arrogantly transferred the stolen money directly to a high-end luxury car dealership. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I logged into a premium public records database that my accounting firm used for corporate asset investigations. I entered the dealership information and the exact transaction date. The database instantly returned a match for a recently processed vehicle title and lien. It was for a brand new, fully loaded Porsche Macan. The purchase price aligned perfectly with the missing $70,000, functioning as a massive cash down payment with the remaining balance financed through a high-interest dealership loan. I clicked on the digital copy of the vehicle registration document. The name listed as the primary registered owner wasn't Derek. It was his young assistant, Madison. He had just bought his 22-year-old assistant a luxury SUV using the exact money I had saved to pay for our newborn son's future college education. The emotional betrayal of his affair suddenly became secondary. Cheating was a disgusting moral failure, but what I was actively seeing on my screen right now was a serious, premeditated financial crime. He had committed grand theft against his own infant son. He had deliberately falsified official banking documents, created a fraudulent shell company, and emptied a protected custodial account just to impress a naive girl barely out of college. Every dollar of that down payment represented my late nights at the office, my stressful corporate audits, and my relentless determination to ensure Leo would never experience the financial insecurity I suffered during my childhood in foster care. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the high-resolution image of the Porsche Macan registration on my right monitor. The physical pain from my C-section incision had completely disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculated anger. Derek genuinely believed he was a master manipulator. He thought he could rob his own family, abandon his bleeding wife, and fly to Mexico without facing any consequences. He had severely underestimated the intelligent woman he married. I didn't just know how to find hidden money. I knew exactly how to use the legal system to completely destroy the person who tried to hide it. I carefully exported every document connected to the Porsche transaction. I compiled the state registry files for Cabo Investments LLC, the wire transfer receipts, and the vehicle registration listing Madison as the primary owner. I saved everything into the encrypted digital dossier I was building against him. The evidence was absolutely irrefutable. No expensive defense attorney could explain away a direct wire transfer from a newborn baby's college fund to a luxury car dealership for a vehicle registered in the name of a young mistress. It was textbook financial abuse, and I was going to make sure the authorities saw every single page of it. I looked down at the silver iPad. Madison had just sent another synced text message. She had attached a photo of herself holding a glass of expensive champagne in the first-class cabin of their flight, thanking her amazing daddy for the incredible new car waiting for her back home. A chilling smile slowly spread across my face. I reached for my own cell phone resting on the edge of the desk. It was time to let Derek know exactly who was in control of this situation. I unlocked my screen and dialed his personal number. I was fully prepared for the pathetic and insulting lies he was about to confidently feed me when he answered. The phone rang 3 times before the line finally opened. Instantly, the deafening sound of heavy bass and electronic club music flooded through the tiny speaker of my cell phone. I could hear the unmistakable clinking of expensive cocktail glasses and the loud overlapping chatter of a crowded resort bar. Derek groaned loudly into the microphone, deliberately letting me hear his annoyance. "What exact part of 'don't call me unless someone's dead' did you not understand, Sienna?" he snapped over the pulsing music. "I'm in the middle of a very important networking conversation with the guys, and you're completely ruining my peace." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream, cry, or beg him to come home to his newborn son. I kept my tone perfectly flat, channeling the exact vocal inflection I use when interviewing hostile corporate fraud suspects during a federal audit. "You're not networking with the guys, Derek," I said calmly. "You're currently sitting in a luxury beachfront suite in Cabo with your 22-year-old junior sales assistant, Madison. And while you were busy playing sugar daddy on an international beach, I was busy investigating a newly registered shell company called Cabo Investments LLC. The loud club music continued blasting in the background, but the line went completely silent on his end for 5 agonizing seconds. I could practically hear the gears turning in his arrogant head as he desperately tried to calculate how much information I actually possessed. When he finally spoke again, his tone had changed dramatically. He let out a loud theatrical sigh followed by a condescending laugh. "Oh my God, Sienna," he laughed, speaking to me as if I were a hysterical little child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "Listen to yourself right now. You sound completely insane. The doctors at the hospital specifically warned me that severe sleep deprivation and hormonal crashes could trigger postpartum depression. But I never imagined you'd escalate all the way to full-blown postpartum psychosis. You're completely delusional." I ignored his pathetic attempt to diagnose me with a mental illness. "Don't try to manipulate me, Derek," I replied coldly. "I know exactly what you did. You falsified bank authorization documents. You drained $80,000 from the college savings account I built for Leo. You funneled that money through a temporary holding account. You transferred it to a luxury car dealership and used it as a massive cash down payment for a brand new Porsche Macan registered solely in Madison's name." He laughed again, this time much louder and more aggressively. "Honestly, you're embarrassing yourself right now, Sienna," he snapped. "This is exactly why you only handle numbers in a cubicle while I actually make the big executive decisions. Those $80,000 haven't been lost. They're temporarily tied up in an exclusive, highly profitable cryptocurrency investment one of my fraternity brothers tipped me off about. The returns are going to be astronomical. I simply moved the funds to maximize our family's wealth because you're too financially conservative to take real risks. And the Porsche registered to your assistant? I pressed, refusing to let him control the narrative. Madison is a junior employee who helps me manage the complicated digital paperwork for the crypto exchange because I'm too busy running my actual sales department. He lied effortlessly, without missing a beat. She needed a reliable company car to travel between our regional offices. It's a standard corporate tax deduction. You're sitting alone in a dark house, bleeding, exhausted, and letting your crazy postpartum hormones invent some ridiculous fantasy where I'm some kind of cartoon villain. Madison isn't even in Mexico with me. I'm sitting here with my college friends having a beer. You need to log off the computer, take your prescribed pain medication, and go to sleep before you do something you'll seriously regret. His ability to spin complex, interconnected lies without a single stutter was genuinely terrifying. If I had just been a normal, exhausted mother who didn't understand the intricate mechanics of shell corporations and electronic fraud, his confident manipulation might actually have worked. He sounded so incredibly certain, so absolutely convinced of his own fabricated reality, that a weaker woman might have apologized for invading his privacy. But I was staring directly at official state registration documents proving every word coming out of his mouth was a calculated deception. "You're a liar, Derek," I said evenly. "I have the digital wire transfer receipts. I have the state incorporation files. I have the dealership title. The money wasn't invested in crypto. It was stolen from your son." The fake amusement instantly vanished from his voice. The club music in the background seemed to fade as his breathing became heavy and sharp against the microphone. His mask of the concerned, condescending husband shattered completely, revealing the vicious, cornered narcissist underneath. He realized I wasn't going to back down, and his playful manipulation was about to turn into open warfare. The heavy club music in the background suddenly became muffled. I heard the unmistakable sound of a sliding glass door opening and closing. Derek had stepped onto the private balcony of his beachfront suite to make sure his mistress wouldn't hear the poison he was about to spit at me. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low, guttural, and trembling with rage. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful psychopath," he hissed into the receiver. "Do you think you're incredibly smart because you know how to read a bank statement? Do you think hacking my personal devices gives you ultimate power over me? All it actually proves is that you're a deeply paranoid, invasive, mentally unstable woman who can't handle taking care of a baby without having a complete nervous breakdown." I remained completely silent, letting him dig his own grave with every word he said. My silence only enraged him more. He wanted me to scream back. He wanted a chaotic emotional reaction to justify his own horrible behavior. When I refused to give him that, he escalated his attack, finally admitting everything while twisting the narrative to make himself the victim. "Yes, I bought Madison the car," he snapped, his voice dripping with self-righteous entitlement. "And yes, we're in Mexico together. Want to know why? Because she actually respects me. She treats me like a successful man while you treat me like an annoying roommate. You've been completely frigid and miserable for the last 9 months. I deserve to enjoy the incredible life I built for us. And if you think for 1 second you're going to ruin my reputation over a simple financial transfer, you're completely insane." He paused to take a harsh breath, clearly pacing back and forth across the balcony. "Now, this is exactly what's going to happen, Sienna. You're going to delete whatever ridiculous screenshots you took. You're going to log out of my accounts, put the iPad exactly where you found it, and keep your mouth shut. If you make a scene, if you tell my mother, or if you dare contact anyone at my company about this, I will unleash absolute hell on you." His threats were calculated. Direct blows aimed at my deepest fears. "I'll hire the most ruthless, expensive shark attorney in the state," He continued, his voice vibrating with malicious confidence. "I'll file for immediate divorce. I'll drag you through family court and use your own medical records against you. You're currently taking strong prescription painkillers for your surgery. You have documented anxiety from your childhood in foster care. I'll tell the judge you're suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and that you're an active danger to our son. I'll take full legal and physical custody of Leo before you even realize what happened. You'll be lucky if you get supervised visitation." A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from the pure evil of his plan. He was actively threatening to steal my newborn son, using the same medical trauma I endured to bring him into the world. And as for the money, Derek sneered, delivering what he clearly believed was his ultimate checkmate: that house we live in is a marital asset. "I don't care what kind of fancy trust fund you put the down payment in. We're married. I live there and contribute to the household. I'll force a judge to order a partition sale of the entire property. I'll liquidate the house, take my legal half of the equity, and leave you completely ruined and totally alone. You'll go straight back to the poverty you came from before you met me. So sit there, take care of our screaming kid, and quietly wait for me to come home. Do we understand each other?" I stared at the glowing monitors on my workstation, taking one slow, measured breath. He honestly believed his aggressive corporate sales tactics would work on a forensic accountant holding federal-level evidence. "Derek," I began calmly, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Don't talk," he interrupted viciously. "You just listen. 2 weeks, Sienna. Be a good little wife and have dinner ready when I get back." The line went dead. He hung up on me. I slowly lowered the cell phone and placed it flat on the desk. He had just threatened to take my son and my home forever. He had drawn the final, unforgivable battle lines. I reached toward my encrypted digital folder. It was time to introduce him to the devastating skills of my brother-in-law. Before my fingers could even touch the keyboard, a sharp doorbell rang through the silent hallway. Someone had just pressed the front doorbell. I froze instinctively. My mind instantly raced through the worst possible scenarios. Was it Brenda returning to steal more of my belongings? Had Derek already called the police for a welfare check? I carefully stood from the leather executive chair, wincing as a sharp pull tugged at my abdominal stitches. I walked out of the office and approached the security monitor mounted beside the front entrance. I looked at the high-definition video feed. It wasn't my toxic mother-in-law or the local authorities. Standing on my front porch looking incredibly stressed was my brother-in-law, Jamal. He was a tall, broad-shouldered cybersecurity expert who always seemed completely out of place in Derek's shallow family. In one hand, he held 2 large paper bags from my favorite local Thai restaurant. In his other arm, he carried a huge box of diapers and 6 large cans of the hypoallergenic formula Leo desperately needed. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and slowly opened the door. Jamal let out a heavy sigh of relief when he saw me. "Sienna," he said, his deep voice filled with genuine concern and visible exhaustion. "I'm really sorry for showing up unannounced. Please let me bring these things inside for you." I stepped aside, allowing him into the kitchen. He carefully placed the heavy grocery bags on the marble island, right beside the empty space where my stolen espresso machine used to sit. Jamal turned toward me with an expression of deep disgust and shame. "I came home from work early today," he explained, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake the baby. "I walked into my kitchen and found your espresso machine sitting on my counter. When I confronted Megan about it, she bragged about how she and Brenda used the spare key to come over here. She told me Derek went to Mexico, and they decided to teach you a lesson in humility." He rubbed his face in frustration, shaking his head. I was furious, Sienna. Absolutely furious. I packed up the machine and put it in the trunk of my car to bring it back to you. But then I realized you probably needed hot food and baby supplies a lot more than coffee right now. What they did to you today What Derek is doing by abandoning his bleeding wife and newborn son is completely unforgivable. I'm deeply sorry you married into this absolute nightmare of a family. A wave of genuine gratitude washed over me. In a family dominated by narcissistic manipulation and toxic entitlement, Jamal was the only person who possessed a moral compass. He was the only one who saw through Derek's golden boy facade. "Thank you, Jamal," I said softly, leaning against the kitchen counter to steady myself. "You have no idea how badly I needed this right now. Derek just called me from Cabo. He threatened to take full legal custody of Leo and force the sale of this house if I dare expose his affair with his young assistant." Jamal didn't seem surprised by the mention of the affair or the legal threats. Instead, his jaw tightened sharply and a serious shadow crossed his eyes. He reached into the inner pocket of his winter coat. He didn't pull out his car keys or cell phone. He kept his hand inside the jacket, staring at me with a level of intensity that sent chills down my spine. The friendly brother-in-law delivering takeout food was suddenly replaced by the senior cybersecurity director. "I'm glad I brought the food, Sienna," Jamal said, his voice dropping an entire octave into a serious, professional tone. "And I'm genuinely glad you're already preparing for a major legal battle against him. But dropping off these diapers and apologizing for my horrible wife isn't actually why I came here tonight. I came here for something completely different." He took a slow step closer to me, glancing nervously toward the hallway as if someone might be listening to our conversation. "I work in high-level corporate network security," he continued quietly. "Because my wife is careless with her digital devices, I monitor our entire home network to protect my own professional data. This afternoon, before I even saw the coffee machine, I intercepted an encrypted digital file Derek had forwarded to Megan for safekeeping." He looked directly into my eyes. "You need to sit down, Sienna. What I found is far worse than him cheating on you." I slowly pulled out one of the heavy wooden bar stools and sat at the kitchen island. The sharp pain in my abdomen throbbed, but the cold adrenaline rushing through my veins kept me completely focused. Jamal reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted black USB drive. He placed it on the cold marble surface and gently slid it across the counter until it stopped directly in front of me. I stared at the tiny piece of plastic, knowing whatever digital secrets it contained were about to fundamentally change the course of my life. "I already know about the stolen college fund, Jamal," I said quietly. "I found his old tablet and traced $80,000 to a car dealership for his assistant. He already confessed on the phone." Jamal slowly shook his head, his expression grim. "That's child's play compared to what's on this drive. Sienna, like I told you, I monitor our home network traffic because I work with sensitive corporate security data. Megan has absolutely no understanding of digital privacy. She leaves her laptop unlocked, her email accounts signed in, and constantly connects to unsecured cloud servers." He exhaled sharply. "Last night, while you were still in the hospital recovering from surgery, Megan had a few glasses of wine and started bragging to me. She told me Derek finally had a master plan to secure his financial independence from you. She said Derek was tired of feeling emasculated by your massive salary and your complete control over the family finances. She actually praised him for being a strategic genius." Jamal rubbed the back of his neck. "When she fell asleep, I decided to run a deep diagnostic sweep on her network activity. I intercepted a massive chain of forwarded emails and digital document files Derek had sent her for emergency storage. He told Megan that if anything ever happened to his primary computer, she needed to keep those files somewhere you would never find them." Jamal pointed toward the black USB drive resting near my hands. "He's trying to steal the equity from your house, Sienna." I frowned at him in genuine confusion. "He can't steal the house," I explained confidently. "The property is legally owned by a blind trust fund created before we ever met. His name is only on the utility bills." Jamal leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms against the marble countertop. I know, he replied seriously. But Derek clearly doesn't know that. Derek genuinely believes his name is on the deed as marital property. The files on that drive prove he's currently in the final stages of quietly taking out a massive second mortgage against this property. He applied for a $150,000 home equity line of credit through a shady online lending institution that barely verifies physical documentation. How does he think he's co-owner? I asked. He submitted the application under both your names. The blood completely drained from my face as the horrifying reality of his master plan finally clicked into place. To execute a joint home equity loan, he would need my explicit legal authorization. Jamal nodded, watching my eyes widen. Exactly, Jamal said. He forged your signature. He digitally copied your signature from old tax returns and pasted it onto the final loan agreements. He also submitted manipulated financial statements to make it appear you approved the transaction while lying in a hospital bed having a C-section. The loan is scheduled to be fully funded and deposited into his private checking account by the end of next week. My forensic accountant brain rapidly calculated the enormous legal implications of what Jamal was describing. Cheating on your spouse is a devastating moral failure that leads to a messy divorce. Emptying a joint bank account is a terrible violation of financial trust. But intentionally forging a signature on a mortgage application across state lines using digital networks is something completely different and far more dangerous. That was federal wire fraud. Derek had just crossed the line from being a terrible husband to becoming a federal criminal. If convicted, he was facing serious time in a federal penitentiary. Jamal tapped the USB drive lightly. Every email, every forged document, and the exact IP addresses he used to submit the fraudulent application are on this drive. I extracted the metadata so his lawyer can never claim his computer was hacked. It proves premeditated intent. I stared at the drive. A fierce sense of righteous justice surged through me. Derek thought his threats would paralyze me with fear. He thought he held all the power. Slowly, I reached out and picked up the small black plastic drive. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered fiercely. "You just gave me the exact ammunition I need to lock him in a federal cage permanently." Jamal nodded slowly, fully understanding the severity of the situation. He didn't offer empty words or tell me to try saving my toxic marriage. He simply promised to testify about the digital interception whenever I needed him in court. Then he gave me a brief hug and quietly left the house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat beneath the harsh blue glow of my dual monitors, finalizing the digital dossier against the man I once loved. By the time the sun rose, casting pale light across the quiet neighborhood, I was completely ready to strike. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct office number of Veronica Pierce. She wasn't just a standard family law attorney. She was a former federal prosecutor who had successfully transitioned into high-stakes corporate litigation and ruthless divorce settlements. She was notoriously expensive, fiercely intelligent, and absolutely lethal in a courtroom. She was exactly the kind of vicious legal monster I needed to tear Derek apart piece by piece. I hired a private nurse to watch Leo for a few hours and immediately drove straight to Veronica's downtown office building. I walked into the sleek modern glass conference room, placed my heavily encrypted laptop firmly onto the polished mahogany table, and handed Veronica the black USB drive Jamal had given me. I didn't cry. I didn't complain about my broken heart or the emotional betrayal. I laid out the dark financial reality with the cold precision of a senior forensic accountant. I meticulously showed her the illegally drained college fund, the fraudulent shell corporation, the luxury car registration documents, and finally the forged digital signature submitted for the massive home equity loan application. Veronica carefully reviewed the extensive documents in complete silence, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. When she finally looked up from the files, a highly predatory smile slowly spread across her face. "Your husband is an absolute idiot, Sienna," she said softly, leaning back in her leather chair. "He has essentially handed us a fully loaded weapon. We're not just going to divorce him. We're going to financially annihilate him." He crossed the line the moment he decided to commit federal wire fraud against a professional investigator. Veronica immediately launched a silent and deadly legal lockdown on my behalf. We moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision. Under her strict legal guidance, I quickly executed a complete systematic separation of all my personal assets. I legally redirected my massive corporate direct deposit paychecks into a brand new, highly secure private checking account established under an entirely different banking institution. I immediately contacted all 3 major national credit agencies and placed a permanent freeze on my Social Security number, instantly blocking the fraudulent home equity loan from being processed or funded by the online lender. Then we systematically targeted our shared financial resources. I legally withdrew exactly 50% of the remaining available funds from our joint checking and savings accounts. I intentionally left Derek with his exact legal half to avoid any early accusations of malicious financial misconduct during the upcoming family court hearings. Next, we permanently canceled every joint credit card where I was listed as the primary account holder. I watched the digital confirmations appear across my screen, officially severing his financial lifeline. The premium platinum rewards cards Derek constantly used to buy expensive steak dinners, book luxury flights, and impress his wealthy fraternity friends suddenly became completely useless pieces of plastic. Deliberately, I did not block his cell phone number or remove his access to my social media accounts yet. I absolutely needed him to remain completely unaware, comfortably sitting on a beautiful sunny beach in Mexico, falsely believing his arrogant master plan was unfolding perfectly without interruption. I thought about him calling me hysterical, unstable, weak. I thought about the threats he made to steal my son, destroy my reputation, and leave me with nothing. Then I clicked send. The encrypted email vanished instantly into the corporate servers of Derek's company. Within seconds, there was no taking it back. The trap had officially been triggered. I leaned back slowly in my chair, staring at the dark reflection of my own exhausted face in the monitor. For the first time since Derek slammed the front door and abandoned us, I finally felt something other than pain. Control. Cold, complete control. By Monday morning, Derek's entire world was going to collapse simultaneously from every direction imaginable. His employer would open an emergency internal investigation into financial fraud and misuse of corporate infrastructure. His access badges, company accounts, and secure network credentials would likely be frozen before he even landed back in the country. His private banking activity was already being flagged by the lender after the fraud alert Veronica filed. And the federal paper trail connecting him to forged mortgage documents was now preserved permanently across multiple encrypted legal archives. He still thought he was on vacation. He still believed he was untouchable. My phone vibrated softly against the desk. A new text message from Derek appeared on the screen. "Don't stay mad forever, babe. I'll bring you something nice back from Cabo." Attached underneath was a photo of him sitting shirtless beside an infinity pool, expensive sunglasses on his face, one arm wrapped casually around Madison's bare waist while she laughed into a champagne glass. I stared at the image for several long seconds. Then I forwarded the photograph directly to Veronica Pierce, along with a single message beneath it. "Perfect. This establishes the affair timeline during the fraudulent transfers and proves he was traveling internationally with the recipient of the luxury vehicle purchased using stolen custodial funds. Add it to the divorce filing." A minute later, Veronica replied, already preparing the emergency motions. Do not contact him again. Let him keep talking. Every message he sends now is evidence. I placed the phone face down on the desk and finally stood up from the chair. My body ached violently from exhaustion, surgery, stress, and adrenaline. But mentally, I had never felt clearer in my life. Down the hallway, I heard Leo beginning to cry softly through the baby monitor. I walked into the nursery and carefully lifted my son into my arms. He immediately settled against my chest, warm and trusting and completely unaware that his father had just detonated his own future. I rocked him gently beside the window while the early morning sunlight spread across the room. Somewhere far away on a beach in Cabo, Derek still believed he was the predator in this story. He had no idea he was already caught. I smiled calmly through the narrow crack in the door. Please do call the police, Brenda, I said softly. In fact, I think that's an excellent idea. Her furious expression faltered for the first time all morning. She clearly hadn't expected cooperation. She expected tears, panic, and emotional chaos. Instead, I leaned slightly against the doorframe and continued in the same eerily controlled tone. Because when the officers arrive, I'll be more than happy to show them the security footage of you illegally attempting to enter my home with hired movers after previously using a stolen emergency key to remove property without permission. Brenda's face tightened instantly. And while they're here, I continued, I'll also provide documentation proving your son is currently under active investigation for federal wire fraud, financial theft from a custodial account belonging to a minor child, mortgage forgery, and corporate embezzlement. The two movers behind her exchanged deeply uncomfortable looks. One of them quietly stepped backward toward the truck. Brenda recovered quickly, lifting her chin arrogantly. You're bluffing, she snapped. Derek told me everything. He said you've become unstable and paranoid since the birth. He warned me you were trying to destroy his life because you're emotionally unwell. I gave a small nod. Yes, I replied. He's been saying that a lot lately. Mostly because there's extensive evidence of him committing multiple felonies. Her expression flickered again. That single word landed differently. Felonies. Not drama. Not divorce. Not family arguments. Criminal charges. I watched the realization begin creeping slowly behind her eyes. Then I calmly reached beside the doorway and pressed the unlock button for the exterior security speaker system mounted near the porch camera. The small speaker crackled softly to life. Brenda, I said clearly enough for the entire porch to hear, this property is legally owned by a protected trust established years before my marriage. Derek has absolutely no ownership claim to this home whatsoever. You are currently trespassing after being formally instructed to leave. The movers looked alarmed now. One of them immediately cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said carefully to Brenda, I think maybe we should go. Brenda spun toward him furiously. Don't be ridiculous, she hissed. She's lying. But her confidence was beginning to crack. I continued calmly. And just so there's no confusion later, this entire interaction is being recorded on 4 separate security cameras and automatically backed up to a cloud server monitored by my attorney. That was the sentence that finally shattered her composure. Her eyes widened. She looked instinctively toward the small black security cameras mounted beneath the porch roof. The movers immediately stepped farther away from the doorway. One of them muttered, Yeah, we're definitely not touching anything here. Brenda's face flushed a violent shade of red. You manipulative little snake, she spat at me. You think you're smarter than everyone else because you have money and lawyers? No, I answered quietly. I think I'm smarter because I never committed federal crimes and tried to steal from my own grandchild. That hit her like a slap across the face. For one long second, the entire porch fell silent except for distant birds and the soft rumble of the moving truck engine. Across the street, neighbors openly stood outside, now pretending not to watch. Brenda realized something horrifying in that moment. The narrative was slipping away from her. This was no longer the story of a fragile postpartum wife having a breakdown. This was becoming the story of a wealthy corporate family caught committing fraud, theft, and abuse. And for people like Brenda, public humiliation was worse than prison. Her phone slowly lowered from her hand. Then, through clenched teeth, she whispered, "Derek is going to destroy you when he gets home." I smiled again, this time wider. He doesn't have a home to come back to anymore. It was a cold, chilling smile that finally made her hesitate. "Please," I replied softly, "call them right now, Brenda." Brenda stared at me, her finger hovering over her expensive cell phone. She was genuinely confused by my complete lack of fear. She expected me to beg for forgiveness, but my calm behavior shattered her aggressive momentum. I remained behind the heavy security chain, my expression completely blank. "Go ahead," I urged again. "Tell the emergency dispatcher you brought a commercial moving truck to my private residence to remove my custom furniture without my consent. Tell them you're attempting forced entry while my newborn son is sleeping inside. Let's see how the authorities handle a documented home invasion." Before her manicured finger could press the call button, the mechanical roar of a heavy engine echoed through the quiet suburban street. A black and white patrol car slowly rounded the corner and pulled directly toward my house. Flashing red and blue lights reflected across the large windows of the moving truck parked in my driveway. Brenda let out a loud, triumphant laugh, her face instantly lighting up with arrogant satisfaction. "Looks like one of your lovely neighbors already called them for me," she said smugly, crossing her arms. "Are you about to leave here in handcuffs, Sienna?" Two uniformed police officers stepped out of the patrol car and quickly walked up the carefully landscaped front pathway. The professional movers immediately backed away from the porch, raising their hands defensively. Brenda rushed halfway down the concrete steps to meet the officers, instantly activating fake tears. She transformed from an aggressive intruder into a deeply concerned grandmother within seconds. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried dramatically, placing a hand over her chest. "My daughter-in-law has completely lost her mind. She's dangerously unstable and refusing to let me collect my son's expensive furniture." The taller officer raised one hand, completely ignoring her theatrical performance. He looked past her and made direct eye contact with me standing behind the partially open door. "Are you Sienna?" he asked clearly. I nodded slowly. "Yes, officer." "I am," I answered calmly. Then he turned his attention back to the crying woman on my lawn. "And you're Brenda?" he asked while looking down at the thick manila folder in his hand. Brenda sniffled dramatically and nodded. "Yes, I'm Derek's mother," she replied confidently, clearly expecting him to arrest me on the spot. Instead, the officer pulled a thick stack of legal documents from the folder and pressed them directly into Brenda's chest. She grabbed them instinctively, staring at the bold black text in confusion. "Brenda, you are hereby being officially served with an emergency temporary restraining order filed yesterday afternoon in County Family Court," the officer stated coldly. "You are legally ordered to remain at least 500 feet away from Sienna, her infant son Leo, and this specific residential property." This order was granted by a judge based on documented evidence of severe harassment and attempted property theft. Brenda gasped loudly, her jaw dropping open as the reality of the legal papers finally hit her. She looked wildly between the officers, panic flooding her face. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, her voice trembling with genuine fear. "I'm only trying to pick up a dining table." The second officer rested his hand firmly on his duty belt. "There is no mistake, ma'am," he said sharply. You are currently in direct violation of a court order. If you do not leave this property within 60 seconds, you will be arrested for violating a protective order. The movers didn't need to be told twice. They immediately dropped their equipment, sprinted back toward the moving truck, started the loud engine, and drove away from the house in complete panic. Brenda stood frozen on the immaculate green lawn. She looked around in horror. Every wealthy, judgmental neighbor in the subdivision was now openly standing outside, watching the elegant country club socialite being publicly humiliated by armed police officers. Her flawless reputation in this exclusive neighborhood had just been permanently shattered. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson. Clutching her designer handbag and the restraining order against her chest, she practically ran toward her luxury sedan. Before climbing inside the vehicle, she turned around and glared at me with pure hatred. "Derek is going to destroy you for this," she screamed, abandoning the fake tears entirely. I smiled one final time from the safety of my doorway. "I seriously doubt that, Brenda," I whispered quietly to myself. Then I shut the heavy oak door, locked the deadbolt, and returned to the nursery. The physical perimeter was secure. Now it was time to sell the house right out from underneath him. I walked back down the silent hallway, making sure every lock was firmly secured. The house was finally safe. I stepped into my office, locked the door behind me, and immediately powered on my workstation. Carefully, I opened a heavily encrypted folder labeled Zenith Holdings. That was the name of the blind trust one had meticulously established 3 years before Derek and I ever went on our first date. Growing up in the foster care system taught me a brutal lesson about the absolute necessity of financial independence. I knew that no matter who I married, I needed a permanent safety net that could never be compromised by a hostile spouse. When we got engaged, Derek assumed my massive corporate salary was simply sitting in a standard savings account. He never bothered to look at the legal documentation when I purchased this multi-million-dollar property in cash. He simply assumed that because we moved in together after the wedding, and because he paid the monthly electricity and water bills, the house was marital property. He was completely wrong. The property deed was registered entirely under the trust, and I was the sole executive trustee. He had absolutely no legal right to a single brick in this building. I didn't want to put the house on the traditional real estate market. A standard sale would require open houses, lengthy bank appraisals, and weeks of closing procedures. I didn't have weeks. Derek was returning from his Cabo vacation in exactly 7 days, and I wanted this property completely erased from his reality before his Uber even reached the driveway. I needed an aggressive, ruthless buyer who prioritized speed over the absolute condition of the property. I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the website of a massive corporate real estate investment conglomerate. They were notorious in our city for buying properties in pure cash within days, demolishing them down to the wooden studs, and rebuilding them into ultra-modern luxury fortresses. I filled out their rapid acquisition form, detailing the prime location, massive square footage, and premium lot size. 20 minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was a senior acquisitions director from the development firm. I explained that I was the sole trustee of the property and that I was highly motivated to execute an unconditional and immediate cash sale. The director was initially skeptical about my extreme urgency. I calmly informed him that I was willing to accept a significant financial cut below the home's current market value in exchange for an accelerated 5-day closing period with absolutely no inspection contingencies. The moment I mentioned my heavily discounted price, the skepticism instantly vanished from his voice, replaced by aggressive corporate greed. He sent a local field agent to conduct a quick exterior evaluation in less than an hour. By early afternoon, the official purchase agreement was sitting in my secure email inbox. The firm offered $850,000 in pure cash, effectively stealing the luxury property at a massive discount. I didn't care about the financial loss. The sheer speed of the transaction was worth every cent. I digitally signed the commercial real estate contracts, exercising my full legal authority as trustee. I sent the finalized documents to Veronica Pierce, my corporate litigation attorney, to ensure the funds bypassed all traditional escrow delays and were deposited directly into my new private, secure, and untraceable checking account. The developers moved with terrifying efficiency. They were eager to begin their massive demolition and renovation project to maximize their seasonal profit margins. The title transfer was aggressively fast-tracked through the county clerk's office by their expensive commercial legal team. Exactly 5 days later, while Derek was busy posting photos of expensive beachfront dinners online, my private bank account registered a massive pending wire transfer. The sale had officially closed. The deed had been completely transferred. This pristine multi-million-dollar suburban sanctuary no longer belonged to me, and it certainly didn't belong to Derek. It was now the exclusive private property of a ruthless corporate development firm that specialized in aggressive residential demolitions. I sat in my office staring at the expensive crown molding and custom hardwood floors. I had spent years making this place beautiful, but I no longer felt any emotional attachment to it. The walls were stained by his lies, and the foundation had been built on his arrogant deception. The house had been successfully sold, but I still had a massive logistical nightmare to manage. I had exactly 48 hours left to completely empty the entire property of my belongings before the demolition crews arrived with their sledgehammers. Sleep was no longer an option. I hired a premium white glove packing service, instructing them to pack everything that legally belonged to me. They descended upon the house like a swarm of highly efficient worker bees, wrapping crystal glasses, rolling expensive Persian rugs, and carefully dismantling Leo's wooden crib. I stood in the center of the living room with a clipboard, directing traffic with the same cold precision I used during a corporate financial audit. I didn't shed a single tear as the beautiful nursery I had lovingly designed over the last 9 months was quickly reduced to a stack of brown cardboard boxes. Every piece of furniture, every artwork, and every baby item was packed, but I gave the moving crew very specific instructions regarding Derek's personal belongings. I told them not to touch a single one of his clothes, his cheap sports memorabilia, or the heavy mahogany desk sitting in the office. His physical footprint in this house was incredibly small compared to the massive financial space he falsely believed he occupied. By dawn on day 12, the massive moving trucks were waiting in my driveway, loading the last of my secure digital servers and encrypted hard drives. I walked through the empty, echoing hallways, holding Leo tightly against my chest. The house felt incredibly vast and completely hollow. I entered the master bedroom one final time. Derek's expensive designer suits still hung perfectly inside his walk-in closet. His custom golf clubs still rested in the corner. His costly watches and cologne collection remained untouched on the bathroom counter. He was going to return from his luxury vacation expecting to find his submissive wife waiting to serve him dinner. Instead, he would find nothing except his own useless junk abandoned inside a literal war zone. The moving supervisor handed me the final inventory manifest. I signed it with a steady hand and watched as the massive trucks pulled away, heading directly toward the highly secure luxury gated community where my new life was waiting. I stood in the empty driveway, waiting for the new corporate owners to officially take possession of their newly acquired asset. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes after my movers left, a fleet of heavy-duty commercial trucks and massive industrial dumpsters roared down the quiet suburban street. The corporate real estate investment company wasted absolutely no time. They had aggressive seasonal profit margins to hit, and this property was now their high-priority project. A rugged, heavily tattooed construction foreman stepped out of a mud-splattered pickup truck carrying a thick roll of architectural blueprints and a heavy steel crowbar. I walked toward him holding the master set of house keys. I handed them over without a single moment of hesitation. He removed his hard hat and signaled to the dozen muscular workers swarming behind him. The crew aggressively pushed past me carrying sledgehammers, heavy power saws, and giant industrial trash containers directly through the front entrance. I stood on the perfectly maintained front lawn, gently rocking Leo in my arms, and watched as the physical dismantling of Derek's pride and joy officially began. The heavy rhythmic sounds of raw destruction echoing through the once peaceful neighborhood were deafening and absolutely beautiful after years of suffocating deception. The violent crash of steel smashing through drywall thundered across the street. Through the large front windows, I watched the foreman swing a massive sledgehammer directly into the imported Italian marble kitchen island. The expensive stone cracked and shattered completely, raining debris across the custom hardwood floors. Another worker drove a heavy crowbar into the costly custom cabinets, ripping the wooden doors from their steel hinges. They were gutting the entire first floor down to the bare wooden studs. The enormous antique chandelier Derek loved showing off to his fraternity brothers was ripped unceremoniously from the ceiling and tossed into a metal dumpster sitting on the crushed grass of the front lawn. Thick clouds of white drywall dust poured from the open windows, completely covering Derek's abandoned golf clubs and expensive suits still trapped inside the master suite. The beautiful sanctuary was rapidly transforming into a chaotic and dangerous construction site. His carefully constructed false reality was physically crumbling into dust right before my eyes. I secured my sleeping baby safely into his luxury car seat. Then I turned around, walked calmly toward my SUV, and drove away toward my new life without looking back. I drove 30 minutes away from the wealthy yet completely accessible suburban neighborhood I had just sold. My destination was a private ultra-luxury gated community nestled in wooded hills overlooking the city's skyline. This place wasn't just a luxury neighborhood, it was a fortress designed specifically for high-net-worth individuals who valued absolute privacy and extreme security above everything else. I pulled my heavy SUV up to the massive wrought iron front gates. There were no simple keypads or friendly retired security guards waving cars through. A heavily armed tactical security officer stepped out of the bulletproof guard station. I lowered my window and handed him my newly issued resident identification card. He scanned the barcode while a sophisticated biometric camera mounted on the stone pillar silently mapped my facial features, instantly linking my identity to my newly leased luxury villa. The heavy iron gates slowly opened, granting me access to my new impenetrable sanctuary. The black luxury SUV finally turned onto the quiet street where Derek believed his perfect suburban life still waited for him. At first, he barely looked up from his phone. He was scrolling lazily through old photos from Cabo, champagne glasses, beachfront dinners, Madison pressed against his chest beneath glowing resort lights. A smug half-smile lingered on his face. Then the Uber slowed abruptly. Derek frowned behind his designer sunglasses and looked out the tinted window. His smile vanished instantly. The entire street was clogged with massive construction vehicles. Industrial dumpsters lined the curb. Orange safety barriers surrounded what looked like an active demolition zone. Thick clouds of white drywall dust floated through the afternoon air like smoke after an explosion. The Uber driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. You sure this is the right address, man?" Derek sat upright immediately. "No," he snapped automatically. "This is a gated residential street." But as the SUV rolled forward another few feet, the reality slammed into him with brutal force. It was his house. Or at least what remained of it. The pristine luxury home he had proudly shown off to coworkers and fraternity friends no longer existed. Half the front exterior had already been ripped apart. The beautiful front windows were shattered. The garage door hung crookedly from twisted metal tracks. Workers in hard hats moved aggressively through the skeletal remains carrying power tools and debris. The carefully landscaped front lawn had been destroyed by bulldozer tracks and heavy machinery. Derek's face drained completely of color. "No," he whispered. The Uber came to a full stop beside a massive industrial dumpster overflowing with broken drywall, shattered cabinets, and splintered wood. For several seconds, Derek simply stared in total silence, unable to process what he was seeing. Then panic exploded through him. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, jerking the door open so violently it slammed against the curb. He stumbled out onto the street, still wearing his expensive vacation clothes and sunglasses, looking wildly out of place among the dust, machinery, and roaring construction noise. A demolition worker carrying a crowbar glanced at him briefly before continuing past without interest. Derek spun in circles frantically. "HY," he screamed over the sound of machinery. "What are you doing to my house?" The foreman stepped out from the destroyed entryway holding a clipboard. He looked Derek up and down calmly. "You the former occupant?" "Former," Derek barked. "I own this property." The foreman snorted once. "No, you don't." He flipped through several pages on the clipboard. "Property transferred to Blackburn Development Holdings 5 days ago. Full demolition and reconstruction permit already approved by the county." Derek blinked rapidly like his brain had stopped functioning. "That's impossible." The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with the lawyers." Then, without another word, he turned and shouted toward the crew. "Rip the rest of that kitchen wall down." A thunderous crash erupted inside the house. Derek physically flinched. He suddenly recognized something lying near the open dumpster. One of his custom golf clubs, snapped clean in half beneath broken concrete. He staggered toward the driveway in horror. Through the exposed remains of the master bedroom wall, he could see fragments of his expensive designer suits buried beneath collapsed insulation and drywall dust. His prized watch display case had been tossed carelessly into a debris pile. Everything was gone. Not packed. Not stored. Destroyed. The realization hit him all at once like a physical blow to the chest. Sienna had never surrendered. She had erased him. His breathing became shallow and erratic. He yanked his phone from his pocket and immediately dialed my old number. The automated message responded instantly. "The number you are trying to reach has been disconnected." Derek froze. He tried again. Disconnected. Again. Disconnected. His hands started trembling violently. He opened Instagram. My account no longer existed. Facebook. Gone. LinkedIn. Deleted. His panic deepened into genuine terror. For the first time in his life, Derek realized something horrifying. He no longer had control of the situation. Then his phone buzzed sharply in his hand. "Unknown number." He answered instantly. "Sienna." "No," Veronica Pierce interrupted coldly. "This is attorney Veronica Pierce representing Sienna and Leo effective immediately." Derek's entire body went rigid. Her voice was calm, professional, and absolutely merciless. "You are hereby instructed to cease all direct contact attempts. Future communication will occur exclusively through legal counsel." Derek swallowed hard. "What the hell is going on?" "You'll be formally served tomorrow morning," Veronica continued. "But since you're standing in the middle of a demolition site looking confused, I'll summarize." Paper shuffled softly on her end. "You are currently under investigation for wire fraud, financial theft, forgery, unlawful mortgage activity, and misuse of corporate financial infrastructure." Derek's knees nearly buckled. "And one more thing," Veronica added smoothly. Your employer terminated your access credentials Friday afternoon after receiving evidence related to federal compliance violations. I strongly advise you not to attempt logging into any corporate systems. Silence. Pure silence. Even the construction noise around him suddenly felt distant. Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then Veronica delivered the final blow. Sienna and Leo are safe, unreachable, and no longer part of your access-controlled environment. Click. The line went dead. Derek stood motionless in the middle of the ruined property while demolition crews tore apart the remains of the life he thought he controlled. Above him, another section of the roof collapsed with a violent crash. Derek spun toward the voice so fast he nearly slipped on the dust-covered subfloor. A massive construction worker in a fluorescent safety vest stood in the exposed hallway holding a heavy steel pry bar. Behind him, 2 other workers were tearing drywall from the remaining interior walls with violent efficiency. Derek pointed frantically around the destroyed house. "What the hell happened to my property?" he screamed. The worker stared at him for a long moment. Then his expression shifted from irritation to recognition. "Oh," he muttered. "You're that guy." Derek's stomach dropped. "What guy?" "The husband." The worker hooked the pry bar over his shoulder casually. "Yeah. The boss said somebody might eventually show up acting confused." Derek's face twisted in fury. "Confused? I live here." The worker snorted. "Not anymore." He gestured toward the gutted kitchen. "This place got sold last week." Derek's heartbeat slammed violently against his ribs. "No," he whispered immediately. "No, that's impossible." The worker shrugged. "Take it up with the county records office." Another deafening crash exploded upstairs. Part of the second floor's ceiling collapsed into the dining room area with a violent shower of insulation and broken wood. Derek physically recoiled. "My wife," he stammered. "Where's Sienna? Where's my son?" The worker pointed toward the front yard. "Don't know. Don't care. We got legal ownership papers and demolition permits. That's all I need." Derek yanked out his phone again with shaking hands and opened his banking app. Access denied. He froze. He tried another account. Locked. His breathing quickened sharply. He opened his corporate email. The login failed instantly. A new message appeared across the screen. "Your access credentials have been permanently revoked." A cold wave of panic flooded his body. "No," he muttered weakly. He dialed his office directly. The call connected to automated HR voicemail. "Due to ongoing compliance investigations, employee access is temporarily suspended." Derek ended the call violently. "This psycho bitch," he hissed under his breath. He immediately dialed my old number again. Disconnected. Again. Disconnected. His breathing became ragged. Then another voice called out from outside. "You can't leave that suitcase there." Derek stumbled back through the hanging plastic tarp toward the front yard. The tattooed foreman stood beside the industrial dumpster holding a clipboard. "We're clearing the driveway in 20 minutes. Derek pointed furiously at the destroyed structure. "You can't just demolish somebody's home." The foreman raised an eyebrow. "We can when we legally own it." "That house belongs to my family." "No," the foreman corrected flatly. "It belonged to a trust." Those words hit Derek harder than any punch. A trust. Suddenly, every conversation he had ignored over the years flashed through his head. The paperwork Sienna handled herself. The accounts she never fully discussed. The property documents he never bothered reading because he assumed marriage automatically gave him ownership. His knees nearly gave out. "She sold it," he whispered. The foreman looked unimpressed. "For way below market, too." Corporate office was celebrating all week. Derek stared blankly at the shattered remains of the kitchen. His kitchen. His television was lying cracked beneath broken beams. One of his framed sports jerseys had been ripped apart and tossed into a mud puddle beside the dumpster. Then his phone buzzed again. This time it was Madison. He answered instantly. "What?" he snapped. Her voice came through panicked and shrill. "Derek, something's wrong." He closed his eyes briefly. "What now?" "I tried using the company card at the airport lounge and it got declined. Then IT locked me out of my email and somebody from compliance called asking questions about the Porsche." Derek's pulse exploded. "What did you tell them?" I don't know. They kept asking about wire transfers and vendor accounts and..." The lines suddenly cut out. Derek stared at the dead screen in horror. Everything was collapsing at once. His marriage, his house, his money, his career, his reputation. Every pillar of his carefully constructed life was disintegrating simultaneously. Behind him, another wall came crashing down with a thunderous boom. The foreman glanced toward the noise and shouted orders to the crew. Derek slowly turned in the middle of the wreckage. Dust floated through the sunlight like ash after a fire. For the first time in his entire adult life, nobody was coming to rescue him. And somewhere far away, completely unreachable behind security gates and encrypted silence, Sienna was finally free. Derek spun his head sharply. Emerging from the gutted remains of the formal dining room was a massive, heavily tattooed construction foreman. The man easily stood 6.5 feet tall. He was covered in a thick layer of gray drywall dust and casually held a heavy steel crowbar in his right hand. He looked at Derek with absolute contempt, clearly annoyed by the sudden intrusion. "You need to put on a hard hat or get off my property right now before I call the local police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing," the foreman warned, taking a heavy step forward. Derek straightened his posture, desperately trying to summon his usual arrogant corporate sales persona. He puffed out his chest and pointed a trembling finger directly at the massive worker. "You're not calling anyone," Derek shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I'm the one calling the police right now. This is my private property. I'm the owner of this house. I live here with my wife. You're actively destroying my home. Stop whatever you're doing immediately and get your men out of my house before I press federal charges against your entire company." The heavy machinery on the first floor suddenly shut down. The sudden silence in the gutted room was deafening. The enormous foreman stared at Derek for a few seconds before letting out a loud, mocking laugh. His deep voice echoed through the exposed wooden beams. "Your house?" the foreman asked, wiping a thick layer of sweat and dust from his forehead. "Look around, buddy. Nobody lives here anymore. The previous owner cleared everything out and handed me the keys 4 days ago. Our development firm bought this entire lot in cash. We closed on the property at the end of last week. You are currently standing inside a commercial construction site owned by a real estate conglomerate." "That's a complete lie," Derek snapped back, his face reddening with a horrifying realization. "My name is on the mortgage. My wife can't legally sell a marital asset without my explicit written signature. I will sue you for everything you have." The foreman casually hooked the heavy crowbar onto his thick leather tool belt. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of heavy legal paper. It was a standardized copy of the expedited commercial title transfer. He unfolded the document and shoved it toward Derek. "I don't care about your marriage problems, buddy," the foreman said coldly. "I only care about the deed. We bought this property free and clear from a registered legal entity called Senate Holdings. The trustee signed the paperwork, took the wire transfer, and gave us full legal possession. Your name isn't anywhere on this." Derek grabbed the paper with trembling hands. His bloodshot eyes scanned the dense black text. Senate Holdings was the exact name of the blind trust Sienna had casually mentioned setting up years ago. He had completely ignored it, assuming his name on utility bills meant shared ownership. The horrifying reality finally hit him. She had legally sold the house out from under him while he was drinking margaritas on the beach. He had never owned a single brick of this property. The foreman grabbed Derek by the shoulder of his expensive travel jacket. "It's over, buddy," he growled, physically shoving Derek backward toward the plastic tarp. "You've got exactly 10 seconds to grab your ridiculous silver suitcase and get off my sidewalk before I have my crew throw you into that dumpster." Derek stumbled backward, bursting through the plastic sheeting and falling to his knees in the wet mud of his former front yard. The heavy silver suitcase tipped over beside him, splashing thick brown sludge onto his designer travel jacket. He knelt there in the dirt, the rhythmic pounding of demolition equipment echoing behind him, completely unable to process the collapse of his reality. He staggered to his feet, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his phone. His first instinct was to call Sienna, yell, threaten, demand answers about how she had orchestrated this massive real estate transaction without him. He quickly found her contact and pressed call. He held the phone to his ear, his heart hammering. Instead of a ringing tone, he was met with a harsh automated voice. "Sorry, the number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." He pulled the phone away and stared at the screen in disbelief. He dialed again. The same message played. The terrifying truth finally sank in. Not only had she sold the house, she had erased herself completely from his life. She was unreachable, untouchable, and he had no idea where to begin looking. The realization hit him that he could not return to his corporate office on Monday morning. He needed an emergency extension, a lawyer, and a way to locate his missing wife. He frantically searched his corporate contacts and dialed Richard's number. The senior vice president of human resources wiped a smear of wet mud from his forehead, clearing his throat to mask the absolute panic in his voice. He needed to sound professional, like a senior executive managing an unfortunate family crisis. Richard said something else, but Derek could barely hear him. His ears rang with a dull, constant buzzing, as if the entire city were underwater. "Derek," Richard's voice now sounded distant, impersonal. "This is no longer a conversation. This is a final notice. Any further attempt to contact the company will be recorded as interference with an ongoing federal investigation." The line went silent. Derek kept holding the phone to his ear, even though there was no one on the other end anymore. Then he slowly lowered it. And for the first time since everything had started, he didn't feel anger. He didn't feel arrogance. He didn't feel the urge to fix it. Only emptiness. The park bench creaked as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The wind lifted the white dust from his hair and jacket as if he himself were being erased. He tried to take a deep breath. It didn't work. His mind, always fast, calculating, confident, now couldn't find a single way out. He opened his phone again, as if the device might change its mind. Nothing. No accounts. No cards. No access. No functional financial identity. Even the glow of the screen felt like it was mocking him. Then another notification appeared. An automatic decline charge he hadn't even noticed before. The failed hotel booking attempt. Derek let out a short laugh. It wasn't humor. It was pure disbelief. "Seriously," he muttered to himself. He ran a hand over his face, leaving a gray dust mark across his skin. For the first time, he understood something simple. They weren't chasing him. He had been shut down. Completely. At that very moment, his phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. No name, just text. "If you continue attempting to use frozen cards or accounts, it will be reported as additional fraudulent activity." Derek froze. The world around him kept moving, cars, people, city noise. But he no longer fit into any of those systems. Not professional. Not financial. not social. He slowly put his phone back into his pocket. He sat there a few more seconds, as if waiting for something to change if he didn't move. Nothing changed. Finally, he stood up. His legs protested, heavy, as if they weren't his own. He looked down the long gray street. 5 miles to his mother's house. He walked. No driver. No money. No plan. Only the sound of his footsteps on the asphalt, each one a reminder of how far he had fallen and how quickly it had all happened. Here is the English translation of your text. The scorching afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on his shoulders as he dragged his heavy silver suitcase along the city's long, cracked sidewalks. The expensive plastic wheels of the luggage scraped loudly against the concrete, grinding through thick mud and drywall dust that still clung to his designer travel jacket. Every muscle in his body ached from a severe hangover and the sheer terror of his collapsing reality. He felt the judgmental stares of passing drivers, stripping away the last shred of corporate pride he had left. By the time he finally reached the exclusive suburban neighborhood where Brenda lived, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows over the perfectly manicured lawns. He practically collapsed against the massive mahogany front door, pounding his fist against the wood in a breathless, desperate panic. The heavy door opened instantly, as if they had been waiting right behind it. Brenda and Megan were standing in the foyer, but they offered no warm or comforting embrace. The inside of the house was in absolute chaos. Megan was pacing across the expensive Persian rug, aggressively biting her nails, while Brenda looked as if she had aged 10 years in a single week. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her expensive designer makeup was smeared down her cheeks. Get in here right now and close the door before the neighbors see you looking like a homeless man, Brenda hissed, grabbing him by the collar of his ruined jacket and physically pulling him into the brightly lit hallway. Derek stumbled inside, letting the handle of his suitcase drop to the floor. "Mom, you have to help me," Derek pleaded, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "Sienna completely destroyed my life. She sold our luxury house, drained our joint bank accounts, and got me fired from my job. The federal authorities are officially investigating my corporate network records. I already know she sold the house, you absolute idiot." Brenda screamed, completely dropping her fake facade of a loving and understanding mother. "I went there last week to .. the dining table, and she called the police on me. She got an emergency restraining order against me in front of the entire neighborhood. I haven't been able to show my face at the country club for days." Megan stopped pacing and turned her anger toward her brother. "And Jamal has been acting extremely strange," Megan shouted, pointing a manicured finger directly at Derek. "He keeps asking me suspicious questions about our network security and making dark comments about your corporate finances. Sienna outplayed all of us completely. You kept telling us you had some brilliant master plan to take her money and secure the property. Instead, you left behind a massive trail of federal crimes and let a glorified accountant completely dismantle our entire family. You were supposed to be the smart one, Derek. Here is the English translation of your text." Derek wiped a layer of dried sweat and construction dust from his forehead, completely stunned by their total lack of sympathy. They weren't worried about his possible prison sentence or his destroyed career. They were only terrified of losing their own elite social status and their unlimited access to my financial resources. "Stop yelling at me and help me fix this," Derek demanded, his panic quickly turning into vicious anger. "We need to find her now. If I get her in a room, I know I can manipulate her into dropping the criminal charges. She's still my wife, and she still loves me. I know exactly how to control her emotional weaknesses." Brenda let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed through the high ceiling. "You clearly don't know how to control anything, Derek," she snapped bitterly. "But you're right about one thing. We need to find exactly where that psychotic woman is hiding before she destroys us completely. Brenda marched aggressively toward her old desk and grabbed her designer leather wallet. She quickly pulled out her high-limit platinum corporate credit card and picked up her cell phone. "I'm going to call an elite private investigator right now," Brenda announced coldly. "I don't care how much it costs or what digital and legal methods they have to use to bypass her security. We're going to track her new address tonight, and we're going there to force her to undo this absolute nightmare tomorrow morning." Brenda's platinum credit card worked miracles. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the elite private investigator handed them a sealed manila envelope containing my exact new address. He had traced the massive corporate real estate transfer from the investment firm directly to my luxury lease agreement. Brenda shoved Derek into the passenger seat of her silver Lexus, with Megan aggressively buckling herself in the back. They sped out of their suburban enclave toward the wooded hills. Derek spent the entire ride rehearsing his manipulation tactics. He planned to use our young child as a psychological weapon, claiming that my postpartum hormones had permanently damaged my sanity. He intended to demand that I immediately drop the corporate complaint and unlock his frozen bank accounts. He genuinely believed his physical presence and his mother shouting would break my confidence. They expected to find another standard suburban subdivision they could easily manipulate. Instead, Brenda was forced to slam on her expensive ceramic brakes. Her Lexus skidded to a sudden stop right in front of the massive 12-foot-high, forged iron security gates of my new residential fortress. This was a heavily fortified enclave designed exclusively for individuals requiring absolute privacy. 2 tactical security officers, heavily armed and wearing dark tactical vests, stepped out of the bulletproof stone guardhouse. Derek rolled down the window, trying to project his usual arrogant authority. "Open the gate now," Derek ordered, waving his hand dismissively. "We're here to see my wife. I demand immediate access to her private property." The lead security officer didn't even blink. He calmly rested his hand on his tactical belt and looked at Derek with a blank expression. "Sir, this is private, high-security property," the officer said in a deep, steady voice. "You are not on the pre-approved digital visitor list. Turn your vehicle around immediately and vacate the entrance." Derek's face flushed red. His fragile ego, already shattered by the loss of his job and sudden homelessness, broke completely. He opened the passenger door and aggressively stepped toward the armed officer. "Do you know who I am?" Derek shouted, pointing his finger at the guard's chest. "I'm a senior regional director, and that is my legal wife hiding in there." Brenda quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and stormed out from the driver's side, losing the last bit of country club dignity she had left. She marched straight toward the heavy iron gates, wrapping her manicured hands around the thick metal bars and shaking them violently. "Let us in right now," Brenda screamed. "She is holding my grandson hostage. I will have your security company shut down today." Megan jumped out of the back seat, holding her cell phone high with the camera recording. "I'm filming this violation of our constitutional rights," Megan screamed hysterically, completely forgetting they were on private corporate property. "I'm going to post this everywhere online and expose this corrupt community." The tactical guards remained unmoved by the chaotic spectacle. A screaming suburban family meant nothing to them. The lead officer stepped back slowly, creating safe physical distance from Derek's aggressive stance. "Ma'am, if you do not release the gate and return to your vehicle within 15 seconds, I will deploy chemical pepper spray and arrest all 3 of you for criminal trespassing," he warned coldly. Then he returned to the bulletproof guardhouse and picked up the secure landline connected directly to my private villa. I was sitting peacefully in my sunlit living room, holding Leo against my chest and drinking a warm cup of herbal tea. The sharp, sudden ring of the dedicated security phone broke the silence. I set my cup down and answered. "Miss Sienna, The deep voice of the head of security said through the speaker. We currently have 3 hostile, unauthorized individuals causing a serious disturbance at the main security perimeter. They are aggressively demanding entry and threatening my staff. I have already dispatched our secondary response unit to the gate. Do you want me to contact local law enforcement and have them formally arrested and removed in handcuffs? I looked at my sleeping son, feeling a deep wave of absolute power rise within me. The trap had worked perfectly. They were exactly where I wanted them. No, officer, I replied softly, a cold smile crossing my face. Please do not arrest them yet. I want you to keep them exactly where they are. I will come down to the gate and handle this situation personally. I ended the call and gently placed my sleeping son back in his crib. The private nurse I had hired for the week was already sitting quietly in the nursery reading a hardcover book. I told her I would be back in exactly 10 minutes. I walked into my spacious walk-in closet and quickly changed out of my comfortable postpartum clothes. I put on a perfectly tailored navy blazer, crisp white trousers, and elegant designer heels. I brushed my hair, applied a light touch of lipstick, and looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I no longer looked like the exhausted, bleeding, terrified woman Derek had abandoned 2 weeks earlier. I looked like a senior corporate executive completely in control of her financial empire and emotional state. I grabbed a thick legal folder from my mahogany desk and stepped out the heavy front door. The morning air was fresh and clean as I walked down the paved path toward the main security perimeter. As I approached the towering iron gates, the chaotic shouting of my toxic in-laws grew louder. Megan was still holding her phone up like a weapon, while Brenda violently shook the metal bars. Derek stood slightly behind them, looking absolutely pathetic. His expensive travel jacket was permanently ruined, covered in thick gray drywall dust and hardened construction mud. His face was pale, sweating heavily, and marked by severe, undeniable panic. When Brenda finally saw me approaching, her eyes widened with malicious rage. There she is, Brenda shrieked, pointing aggressively through the iron bars. You psychotic, ungrateful woman, open this gate right now and explain exactly why you stole my son's house and froze his joint bank accounts. I didn't speed up. I walked with deliberate, intimidating slowness, my expensive heels clicking sharply against the smooth concrete path. I stopped a few meters from the gate, safely out of their physical reach. The 2 tactical security officers immediately stepped beside me, standing like heavily armed bodyguards. I didn't yell at Brenda or even look at her. My eyes stayed fixed entirely on Derek, watching the pure terror radiating from his violently trembling body. I handed the thick legal folder directly to the head security officer. Please give this to my ex-husband, I said calmly. The officer took the heavy envelope, stepped forward, and slid it through the narrow opening in the iron bars. Derek hesitated, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the thick papers. Open it, Derek, I ordered, my voice clear and powerful over the morning breeze. He struggled with the seal and pulled out the thick stack of official legal documents. Brenda and Megan immediately crowded over his shoulders, trying to read. The first document was a formal petition for absolute divorce. Directly beneath it was an emergency family court order granting me full legal and physical custody of Leo, specifically citing severe financial abuse and pending federal criminal charges. Derek immediately tried to use his usual manipulation tactics. Mom, don't look at this, Derek stammered frantically, trying to shove the papers back into the envelope. She completely forged these legal documents. She lost her mind after surgery. She's trying to steal my money and frame me for corporate fraud because she's jealous of my success. I smiled coldly, stepping closer to the iron bars. You have no money, Derek, I stated clearly, ensuring Brenda and Megan heard every word. The house belonged to my blind trust. You never owned a single brick, and you are not being accused of corporate fraud. You are under active FBI investigation for serious wire fraud." Brenda gasped loudly, grabbing Derek tightly by the arm. "What the hell is she talking about?" Brenda demanded, her voice suddenly trembling with real fear. "I'll tell you exactly what she's talking about," I continued softly, systematically dismantling their entire false narrative. "While I was bleeding on an operating table in a hospital, your precious golden boy forged my legal signature to illegally take out a $150,000 home equity loan using his secure corporate network." Derek wiped a layer of dried sweat and construction dust from his forehead, completely stunned by their total lack of sympathy. They weren't worried about his potential prison sentence or his destroyed career. They were only terrified of losing their own elite social status and access to my financial resources. "Stop yelling at me and help me fix this," Derek demanded, his panic quickly turning into vicious anger. "We need to find her now. If I get her in a room, I know I can manipulate her into dropping the criminal charges. She's still my wife, and she still loves me. I know exactly how to control her emotional weaknesses." Brenda let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. "Clearly you don't know how to control anything, Derek," she snapped bitterly. "But you're right about one thing. We need to find exactly where that psychotic woman is hiding before she ruins us completely." Brenda marched aggressively toward her old desk and grabbed her leather wallet. She quickly pulled out her high-limit corporate platinum credit card and grabbed her cell phone. "I'm calling an elite private investigator right now," Brenda announced coldly. "I don't care how much it costs or what digital and legal methods they have to use to bypass her security. We're tracking her new address tonight, and we're going there to force her to undo this absolute nightmare tomorrow morning." Brenda's premium credit card worked miracles. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the elite private investigator handed them a sealed manila envelope containing my exact new address. He traced the massive corporate real estate transfer directly to my luxury lease agreement. Brenda shoved Derek into the passenger seat of her silver Lexus, with Megan aggressively buckling herself in the back. They sped out of their suburban enclave toward the wooded hills. Derek spent the entire ride rehearsing his manipulation tactics. He planned to use our small child as a psychological weapon, claiming my postpartum hormones had permanently damaged my sanity. He intended to demand that I immediately drop the corporate complaint and unlock his frozen bank accounts. He genuinely believed that his physical presence and his mother's shouting would break my resolve. They expected to find another standard suburban development they could easily manipulate. Instead, Brenda was forced to slam on the brakes. Her Lexus skidded to a stop directly in front of towering 12-foot iron security gates of my new residential fortress. This was a heavily fortified enclave designed exclusively for individuals requiring absolute privacy. Two heavily armed tactical security officers in dark vests stepped out of a bulletproof stone guardhouse. Derek rolled down the window, trying to project his usual arrogant authority. "Open the gate now," Derek ordered, waving his hand dismissively. "We're here to see my wife. I demand immediate access to her private property." The lead security officer didn't even blink. He calmly rested his hand on his tactical belt and looked at Derek without expression. "Sir, this is private high-security property," the officer stated firmly. "You are not on the pre-approved digital visitor list. Turn your vehicle around immediately and leave the entrance." Derek's face flushed red. His fragile ego, already shattered by his job loss and homelessness, completely broke. He opened the passenger door and stormed toward the armed officer. "Do you know who I am?" Derek shouted, pointing at the guard's chest. "I'm a senior regional director, and that's my legal wife being hidden in there." Brenda quickly unbuckled and got out from the driver's side, losing the last shred of country club dignity she had left. She marched to the gate and grabbed the iron bars, shaking them violently. "Let us in right now," Brenda screeched. "She is holding my grandson hostage. I will have your entire security company shut down today." Megan jumped out of the back seat, holding her phone up, camera recording. "I'm filming this. This is unlawful restriction of our constitutional rights." Megan shouted hysterically, completely forgetting they were on private corporate property. The tactical guards remained completely unmoved. The lead officer stepped back slightly and spoke into a secure phone inside the guardhouse. "Ma'am," the officer said calmly, "if you do not return to your vehicle in 15 seconds, I will deploy chemical spray and arrest all three of you for criminal trespass." Inside my villa, I was sitting peacefully in my sunlit living room, holding Leo against my chest and sipping herbal tea. The sharp ringing of the dedicated security phone on my kitchen island broke the silence. I answered. "Miss Sienna," the deep voice of the head of security said through the speaker, "we have 3 hostile, uninvited individuals causing a serious disturbance at the main perimeter. They are aggressively demanding entry and threatening staff. Should I contact local police and have them arrested and removed in handcuffs?" I looked at my sleeping child, feeling a wave of calm control wash over me. "No," I replied softly. "Please don't arrest them yet. Keep them exactly where they are. I will come down to handle this personally." I ended the call, placed Leo back into his crib, and went to my walk-in closet. I changed out of my postpartum loungewear into a perfectly tailored navy blazer, crisp white pants, and elegant designer heels. I brushed my hair, applied light lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror. I no longer looked like a broken, exhausted woman recovering from surgery. I looked like a senior executive in full control. I took a thick legal folder and walked out of the house. As I approached the iron gates, their chaotic shouting grew louder. Megan was still filming. Brenda was shaking the bars. Derek stood behind them, pale, trembling, completely destroyed. When Brenda saw me, her eyes filled with rage. "There she is," Brenda screamed. "Open this gate, you psychotic woman." I walked slowly, deliberately, letting my heels click against the pavement. I stopped a few feet from the gate. The security officers stood beside me like armed professionals. I didn't look at Brenda. I looked directly at Derek. I handed the legal folder to the head of security. "Please give this to my ex-husband," I said calmly. The officer slid the folder through the gate. Derek's hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside was a formal divorce petition and a court order granting me full legal and physical custody of Leo, citing severe financial abuse and pending federal charges. Derek immediately tried to speak. "Mama, don't look at this. This is fake. She's lying. She's insane." I stepped closer. "You have no money, Derek," I said calmly. "The house belonged to my blind trust. You were never on the title. And you are not being accused. You are being investigated by the FBI." Brenda gasped. I continued. "While I was in surgery, your golden boy forged my signature to take out a $150,000 home equity loan using corporate access. That's exactly why he was fired 48 hours ago. But that's not even the worst part." Brenda froze. "He also drained $80,000 from your newborn son's college fund to buy a luxury Porsche for his 22-year-old assistant." "That's a lie," Derek shouted. "Page 3, I said calmly. Brenda grabbed the folder and flipped it open. Her face changed as she saw the vehicle registration and bank records confirming the stolen funds. Megan lowered her phone. Derek tried to grab it back, but Brenda shoved him away. "You promised you had everything under control," she whispered in horror. "I told you," I said quietly. "He is a pathological liar. And now he's your problem." Before I could turn away, a sleek black SUV pulled up behind Brenda's Lexus. Megan turned first. "Jamal." "Thank God." But Jamal didn't look at her. He walked straight to the gate. Security unlocked a side entrance. He stepped inside. Megan stared in confusion. Jamal, why are you on her side? Jamal opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I am on the side of truth, he said coldly. He handed the folder to Megan. I ran a forensic audit of our home network. I found your deleted messages. You knew everything. You encouraged it. You helped hide it. Megan went pale. I'm filing for divorce, Jamal said. The silence was absolute. Derek was broken in the dirt. Brenda was panicking against the car. Megan was frozen in shock. I turned and walked back into my secure villa. 8 months later, everything was over. Derek is serving a 3-year federal sentence for wire fraud. Brenda is buried in debt and social isolation. Megan lost her marriage and home. Jamal divorced her and took custody. And I am sitting in my private garden with my son, finally safe, finally free. People often think toxic families are powerful. They aren't. They only survive as long as no one holds them accountable. And the moment you stop accepting disrespect, their entire system collapses. If you're reading this and wondering whether you can leave a toxic situation, the answer is yes. You can. And your life on the other side will feel like peace you forgot was possible.